guys, welcome back. In today's video, we are talking about shorts admitting their manipulations, prepping for a squeeze, banks failing, and many more in this video. First, we're taking a look at this. Robinhood has sent FINRA and AWC, consenting to a slew of offenses, including, but not limited to, distributing false/misleading info to customers, falsifying trade, order, and position data, denying asset transfer to other brokers, failing to supervise paid social influencers. So essentially everything that we have been saying for the past few years were of course all true, and they've admitted to that. And this is exactly what they've done. And remember, this is including but not limited. So this is firstly very important to understand, but everything that we've talked about in terms of what they've done to suppress AMC and GME, they are admitting to doing so. Again, denying asset transfer to other brokers. Obviously, we talked about how some people wanted to obviously move their shares onto other brokers that didn't lend their positions out, that didn't sell their data, obviously the payment for order flows, to other institutions. And so these were things that they prevented for the sake of helping out institutions and obviously screwing over the retail investors. Some other stuff, obviously falsifying trade, order, and position data. And like we talked about, all the short data that we're seeing are very likely to be false because of the fact we are seeing how, whether it's brokers, whether it's institutions, to be just making up numbers, to be falsifying trades. And that's exactly what we saw. Distributing false and misleading info, obviously we know about that as well. Again, I have to clarify this. I have to really emphasize this in terms of this is including but not limited, because we can already think of some other ones, whether it's taking away the buy buttons or, again, talking about all these other things. There are so many things that's obviously involved. Even the failing to supervise paid social influence. They aren't the only firms. We obviously had other firms where social influencers, they talk about something without obviously doing the due diligence, whether you take a look at FTX, whether you take a look again at Robinhood as well. And it's why I always say, take what I say with a grain of salt, take everyone, the speech statement with a grain of salt. Make sure you always do your own due diligence and research. That is the most important aspect, because there are some people who are taking money, who are spreading false data for obviously the sake of doing so, and it's very important to understand that. And so that's what we talked about with how they've been trying to manipulate AMC and what they've actually done to manipulate AMC, and finally they're obviously admitting to this. Again, there is so much more, and it gets me angry every time I talk about this, but this is what they've done. And a big reason for this is, again, taking a look at this picture, and this was their VAR. This was their margin calculations, where you can see why AMC and GameStop took up 65% and 90% respectively, $850 million, $250 million. And this is obviously just for Robinhood. It doesn't even include all these other institutions. And this was when they had to stop it. Again, this number could be even bigger now, and again, I do believe that is so much bigger now, but this was the reason for why they had to use all of these tactics, all of these manipulation methods, because of the fact we possess so much threat to them, and they were extremely worried. And so this was a very good picture to obviously understand the whole situation, understand everything that was obviously going on. Now, another thing is understanding the system disruption that the DTCC is prepping. So the system disruption is obviously just a nice way of saying a massive crash, or in my eyes, I think the squeeze to be happening. Because the reason why we say this is, could it be rated as a major high-frequency trading hedge fund? Citadel Millennium expected liquidations, reporting hard L's in Q1, where obviously we talked about recently of how we're seeing firms like Citadel, seeing firms like Millennium who had to close out their over-leveraged positions, their highly leveraged positions, and they are actually closing out on losses. They're down for the month of February. They're very likely to be down for the month of March as well. And all of these are, of course, big problems, because what we are seeing is these high leverage positions to be closed. Therefore, the market is, of course, going to see more turbulence. But not only that, it's about understanding this. What people don't understand is banks can't invest in hedge funds, but the loophole is they can invest in pod shops in the hedge funds. So when these pods lose money, it's mainly banks. So smile when you see this F the banks. And so going back to what we talked about here, about seeing how hedge funds are obviously closing out their positions. So On the surface, what we're seeing is hedge funds getting screwed, is hedge funds are losing out, and that's in fact what it is. But when you understand what's underneath it, you understand that banks were involved as well. And so we are seeing banks lose money. Now remember, this isn't just one way that banks are losing out money. This is two ways. Firstly, the money in which they have invested are losing out. They're losing money on their investments. But you also have to understand is that when these hedge funds are losing money, remember, they're losing the money in which they borrowed from these very banks as well. So you can understand how all of these massive institutions are obviously all taking hits. We are seeing the market just bouncing back right now, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the S&P has obviously dropped over 10% in the last few days. It doesn't take away the fact that we have seen trillions of dollars wiped out. It doesn't take away from the fact that we are seeing hedge funds closing out positions at a loss. These are all things that have been realized. These are all things that have actually happened. And so that's how we know that these banks, that these institutions are obviously losing out on money. You can also understand, remember how Citadel needed loans to pay back other loans. They also lost money in February. They also just had the pod blow up. So you can see this. And this is what obviously everyone feels about King Griffin. And this is what we talked about with how they're losing money. And remember, Citadel was already taking up loans. They needed loans to pay back loans. But not only that, they needed loans to pay back their investors. And so when I say we are preparing for the squeeze, or as they word it, system disruption, I'm saying it because we have so many things that are showing how what has been stopping AMC from blowing up, from what has stopped GME from blowing up, from squeezing. Every firm that was in the way are all starting to get cleared out, are all starting to see massive disruptions, are seeing massive liquidations on their positions. They're seeing a massive illiquidity issue happening on their capital. And that's exactly what we want. And that's exactly how we should be expecting the squeeze to obviously happen. Now, another thing that's very important to understand is UBS to assume all open contracts for Credit Suisse effective March 23rd. So this is another bombshell on top of everything that we have just talked about. Again, we talked about, admitting to their manipulations, understanding their value at risk, understanding the system disruption, understanding how banks and shorts are losing out. We're now seeing UBS assuming all open contracts for Credit Suisse. So what does this mean? Well, all of the open contracts again dumped onto UBS. And for those keeping score at home, that means every shady position, synthetic shorts, and hidden liability from Credit Suisse is now UBS's problem. UBS didn't buy the contract, they were forced to absorb them. This isn't just some accounting shuffle, someone's getting left holding a financial ticking time bomb. Let's not forget that Credit Suisse has been drowning in derivatives, swaps, and synthetic positions for years. They're one of the biggest players in the naked shorting and FTD game, and now all of that is landing right on UBS's doorstep. And again, just to make it clear of exactly what's happening. Obviously, the whole situation started with kohrs, and when they went bankrupt because of the toxic GME swaps, it went under Credit Suisse. Now, what was interesting was that when Credit Suisse absorbed these GME swaps, what they also actually opened were the toxic AMC swaps. And when these two positions got too big, we saw Credit Suisse going bankrupt. And then what we are seeing is that this very swaps that bankrupted kohrs, that bankrupted Credit Suisse, are now being absorbed and forced absorbed by UBS. So you can obviously understand just how toxic these are. And these are now UBS's problem. We are already seeing how UBS is experiencing big problems, whether it's liquidity problems, whether it's margin problems. These are all been highlighted. And now on top of all those problems that they have to absorb these swaps. So you can see how we are seeing one by one, slowly but surely, how all of these short sellers are starting to see their positions get too big. Everything that we have said in the past about how, yes, they can kick the can down the road. Yes, they can reset the FTDs for now. Yes, they can create more synthetic shorts, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it still exists, that is still there. And eventually someone has to pay for it. And now we're seeing those very synthetic shorts being actually, the bomb that's exploding these short hedge funds. And so what we are obviously going to be expecting as time goes by is these firms to all have to cover their positions. These firms will either face bankruptcy or they cover these swaps, or again, the two combined. And so this is like why I said, why banks failings, institutions falling, and why we are prepping for a squeeze. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys next time.